going to be talking about benefits of breastfeeding, which is a very common topic amongst young mothers. Once they have had a baby and during the pregnancy, they often read a lot about breast milk and the importance of it and how do you get started. These are the things that are often covered. So while there is so much evidence that's available, that's loads of evidence actually, I would say, that so much that talks about importance of breast milk and the antibodies that it contains, and the immunological benefit that the baby can get out of it. This is something that's supported with a lot of evidence already available. But there is one more very compelling reason why mothers should continue to breastfeed or should be motivated to continue to breastfeed for a longer period of time, not just start breastfeeding, would be about the mechanical benefits of breastfeeding, which often nobody talks about. Don't even know about it, because when they come into my clinic, they often say, I mean, is it okay if I just pump the milk and give the baby? It seems like it's all right, right? Because the breast milk is the one that often gives what the immune benefit for the baby, so it should be sufficient. Well, direct breastfeeding has far more benefits than breast milk itself. So I often tell mothers there is magic in breast milk, but there's far more magic in directly breastfeeding. The real magic is there. Now they say, why would you say that? So to understand that, you need to understand that there are several muscles in the oral cavity of the baby, an infant. And there are muscles that are around the facial muscles, there are thoracic muscles, there are different muscles that get engaged while breastfeeding. So the development of these muscles is primarily dependent on the infant feeding choice that the mother would make during the time of infancy of a baby. One would say that these muscles get engaged and they are optimally developed due to long-term breastfeeding. So the mechanical benefits of breastfeeding would be about development of a dental arch, supporting of the optimal development of airway, and also the intraoral development, which the baby would need for dental health and all other functions of the baby in terms of the growth of the baby, in terms of various functions such as sucking, swallowing, chewing later on, speech development. All of these have a correlation with direct breastfeeding. The mechanics that play a major role to develop these functions later on in life. And to explain a little bit, the tongue has a huge function to play in how it shapes up the palate. So Dr. Brian Palmer, he was a great advocate of breastfeeding, and he was a dentist, So he studied a lot about how does an infant feeding choice change the oral development, or the oral development including the facial musculature and the thoracic musculature. And what he comes up with his study, and he even looked at different primitive skulls, thousands of skulls, and he was quite amazed to understand that while there could have been exclusive breastfeeding during the time of primitive times, earlier times, he noticed that there was not a single case of malocclusion. So malocclusion is basically inappropriate development of the arch, dental arch, leading to crowded teeth for a growing child, or even later delayed dentition, for example, sometimes. So, and then compromised airway. So all of these things, he noticed that it was not occurring when we had exclusive breastfeeding longer periods of time during human history. And when we shifted that infant feeding choice to be making more from the bottle, or maybe other pacifiers used, or anything apart from the mother's breast going into the baby's mouth during the infant development, you notice that all of these functions seem to be greatly impacted, leading itself into other conditions later in life, such as snoring, sleep apnea, and also respiratory concerns such as asthma, even asthma or other respiratory illnesses as well. Even recurrent, ear infections, you can say. So the palate has a very important role to play in all of these functions, because the palate takes a shape around the movement of the tongue, So it's important for the development of the baby to directly breastfeed at the mother's breast, allowing the optimal development of these musculatures. Whereas it might not happen during the bottle feeding, for example. Even if the mother chooses to actually pump and put that into a bottle and give it to the baby, you're going to compromise on the mechanics of how the baby feeds, right? So in the bottle, when the baby is sucking through the bottle, the baby actually does a piston kind of suction and engages the oral musculature rather than the thoracic musculature, which expands the muscles around the thoracic cavity, allowing on optimal development of the airway in some way. So there is a huge difference between how a baby would breastfeed and develop through direct breastfeeding vis-a-vis how the baby would develop through bottle feeding.
So Yasmin, sometimes mothers have really painful breastfeeding. What do you suggest such mothers? How to go about it?
Well, to have a great start in the beginning is really important for a mother, to be able to have good positioning and latch for the baby. And to be able to prepare that, I'm going to have to take your attention to the importance of knowing how to really support your birth, that is during your pregnancy, To have a discussion with your care provider to let them know that you would like to wait until the spontaneous labor begins, and not needing to have an induction and other instrumental births perhaps, or any medical intervention that might occur during the labor. So to really have an open conversation with your care provider, that may be an important factor during the actual birthing process, is something that needs to be discussed in detail, because having a supported birth can change the way your perception may be about how you begin feeding your baby, because you're disrupting the process of bonding for the baby with the mother. If there is an episode of perhaps cesarean or forceps delivery, or maybe a vacuum birth, or even for that matter an epidural birth, all of these medically interventions can provide factors that can lead the baby into a state of distress and separation between mother and baby, already cofacting that into a difficult beginning for the feeding of the baby. Because the mother has had an IV line or the intravenous line that sometimes is given to the mother, anticipating or maybe a cesarean during the time of labor, can pump in so much fluid into the mother's body that can lead into distension between the intracellular fluids, intercellular walls, and leading into a distension. So when that kind of a distension happens, to be able to have access to the colostrum, which is the first milk of the mother, which is viscous in nature and not really flowy and liquidy like maybe the mature milk is, to be able to access the small amounts of colostrum in this distension or distended state of the mother's body would be difficult, leading itself into a perception that the mother is actually not making enough milk, and there is no milk at all after the baby is born. So it would be interesting for mothers to know that you actually make milk during the second trimester of your pregnancy, not after birth. So nature provides food first, even before the baby is even arrived, and do not lead a baby to a state of starvation. So nature provides for food first. So to be able to access the colostrum in case of a cesarean or an instrumental birth or other medications that might be used during labor, the technique that can be encouraged for mothers to know is a reverse pressure softening, a technique where you are allowing the fluid system of the body of the mother to actually drain into its own drainage system rather than to lead to a state of distension in the breast. And this will allow the lymphatic system to drain itself, and other systems such as the blood system pumping in lots of blood to make a lot of milk in the breast. All of this to really settle and to have access to the breast milk for the baby. And if the areola, which is the darker portion around your nipple, if that is soft and baby is able to get a good grasp of it without having to find it difficult, like an extended balloon, for example, the baby may not have a slippery surface and will have a good grasp. That will allow for a great beginning to have gentle and painless feeding. So the other reason for painful feeding could be painful feeding could be a bad latch, an improper latch, or improper positioning, or other conditions such as oral restrictions such as tongue ties. The tongue tie plays a huge role, and it's say about 10 to 15%, which is not evidence-based at this point, but it often seems to be that common that you get to see a lot of babies who might have a condition called a tongue tie, which can lead to painful feeding of the mother. And if with good lactation support during the early days of breastfeeding is not sufficient for the mother to get into a comfortable state to comfortably feed the baby, then she must reach out to an IBCLC, who is an international board certified lactation consultant, to get help to see if the baby might have a condition called a tongue tie. And there is a treatment process that needs to be followed, and an aftercare that needs to be followed as well, to ensure that the baby and the mother could continue to have comfortable and joyful feeding, I would say, because this is a huge distress for many mothers.
A lot of mothers are new mothers, don't know what they're doing, they're trying to read and accumulate some information. But while they feed, many times baby feeds differently, and they don't know whether it is enough for the baby or not. So how to find out, how mothers can find out whether it is enough for the baby, adequate milk is gone, or no?
So it's a common concern for mothers to think about, whether my baby is having enough milk, and it's a very, very predominant, the number one reason why mothers actually keep reaching out for help, whether it's a social media or, lactation experts, or maybe even their own family members, being unsure about whether the baby is actually having enough milk, So if you need to know what the guidelines are, the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, recommends that the weight gain is one of the most significant factors to know whether the baby is having enough milk. And that's about, say, 150 grams to about 200 grams a week for the first 12 weeks. And then it moves on to a different recommendation that's about 120 grams to about 150 grams a week. And that changes again at 6 months. But the second factor is whether the baby is well hydrated. And that's about 6 to 7 diapers in a day, 24 hours period of time. And then you have at least about 2 or 3 stool passing, basically the bowel movements. And if you see these 3 factors happening, often the experts tell that baby is actually having enough milk. But what seems to bother mothers a lot more is the 4th factor, which is very important in my discussion with mothers, is that they say the baby is not satisfied, even though the baby is having enough bowel movements, enough diapers. You still notice that the baby is actually not satisfied. Often the baby needs to come back to me and try to feed and try to put the baby back onto the bed, and then the baby is again crying and howling and wanting to come back to the breast. So this 4th factor is the one that often sways the mothers to start to think that they may not have enough milk. And that, I think I can, take you back to the kind of birth you've had, especially when they are medicated births, a lot of intervention during the birth. Babies go through a lot of trauma and separation from the mother, so that often leads for the baby not to be settled. So their autonomous nervous system is a bit jarred up, you can say, or it's loaded. So therefore the babies often need a physical contact with the mother. So it seems to be understood differently from a mother to say that the baby may not be having enough milk because the baby is unsettled or crying. But that's not the truth. The truth could be that they could be held up trauma from the birth story, and that needs to be treated and helped as well.
So Yasmin, basically for mothers to start breastfeeding is the most challenging time of the whole process, especially who have cesarean. And after cesarean, they cannot breastfeed the baby immediately for various reasons. So, in such cases, what do you suggest how to go about it for those mothers with cesarean?
So most mothers who have had cesareans are often, they find it very difficult to breastfeed, and they come back and later, several weeks later, they come back and they probably say that, I couldn't have a great start because I had a cesarean. I was under general anesthesia, or maybe I was on an epidural or a spinal anesthesia, and I just couldn't sit up. It was extremely painful. I sometimes had maybe even infection, So the one that I want to reassure mothers is for them to know that cesarean, although creates a huge challenge for a mother to be able to be available for her baby, what is important for her to know is that no matter how she is, in which state she is, others around her can be prepared to help the baby to manage to get to the breast. So this is something that needs to be prepared ahead of time. So usually mothers who are during pregnancy often read a lot about childbirth, and they read a lot about the fetal development, and they are very fascinated by the process and the journey around the pregnancy. But they don't read much about breastfeeding as much, because the focus is more on the benefits of breast milk rather than how to get started. So it's more theoretical, and they really don't understand how to make themselves comfortable in practical ways. So when a mother has had a cesarean, one of the few things that you need to take care of is that the wound, the incision which is on the abdomen of the mother, which could be a vulnerable area for a mother to think that if I take the baby on me, there could be movements of the baby and that can hurt her. So how to elevate that issue is to take a rolled up blanket or maybe a towel and keep it on her abdomen, on the area of the incision. That could give her a little bit of cushioning and reassures the body that you can feel comfortable about the baby being on your abdomen. That's one thing. The second thing is to just make her comfortable on the bed. And nowadays in hospitals you have these levers that allow, or adjustable beds which can be raised up and lowered according to the comfort of the mother. So you can go up to say about 30 to 35 degrees and allow the mother to be slightly propped up, and give her enough generous amount of pillows around her that makes her comfortable, and even a pillow underneath her knees that can give her a little more comfort, and then make her feel less painful if she's had a cesarean. So you need to simply take the baby and actually put the baby on the abdomen. That allows the baby to have a self-attachment, which is called the biological nurturing position or the laid-back position, and allows the baby to find his own way to be able to move on the mother's chest and actually latch. That's one of the best ways and most natural ways of how the babies would begin to feed. And often babies do not require a lot of help when we try this. And I have done this in my clinic even 6 weeks later when the baby has not even managed to latch even once. And it's amazing to see how the mother and baby actually starts to bond when you put the mom in that biological nurturing position, in a reclined position, and put the baby on her in a skin-to-skin contact. That makes it extremely comfortable and a cozy place, a kind of a habitat. You can say that you create a habitat around the mother and baby, and then they really create their own world of bonding, and then the baby is able to latch. And it's an amazing experience for the mothers. Often they end up crying and they say that this is the first time my baby has actually managed to latch this way, and I never knew the baby could do it on its own, So this is something that I think mothers should know about. We now have increasing number of mothers going back to work, and one of the major concerns is that how do I continue to feed my baby, and do I have to wean my baby? And often mothers get only about 3 months for them to go back to work, and well, there are a few states in India which do provide extended leave for about 6 months, which is the most ideal one. But if mothers have to go back to work at 3 months, a little bit of planning can really make it much more comfortable for her and easier for her to know that she can have a conversation with her employee to let them know that you wish to continue to breastfeed. It's a very important decision to make. And letting people know that it's important for you often returns with a lot of empathy. People do understand, and they often try to support you. So trying to see if there's enough place and a clean place in your office, or maybe in the school, or maybe in the a work setup, to see if there's comfortable room for you to pump or express milk. It's a very important point to consider, because you might need to take small breaks, say about 15-20 minutes of break, to be able to express milk, and also know how to store it and to be able to carry it back home so that baby can have it the next day. So you just need to make sure that you keep 1 day ahead of time so that you can keep supply enough for the baby for the next day, and do not have to have a whole stash of milk bags stored up in the refrigerator, because often mothers say that, oh, I don't have enough milk stored up in the refrigerator, so maybe I just have to wean my baby. But that's not really that's really not the challenge. The challenge is to see that you have enough support in the office, and you manage to get a few breaks during the daytime, so you can express milk, store it, and bring it back home safely, and also know how to store it safely in the refrigerator at home, and how often should you cycle it out. So if you put it in the refrigerator, you can keep it for about 7 to 8 days, but if you freeze it, it can stay up to 3 months. So knowing this should give a little bit of comfort for mothers to know that they can continue to breastfeed for baby for a long time, as long as she wishes to or the baby wishes to, and that should make it comfortable for her to go back to work.
How long do you think one should breastfeed the baby?
The common concern of mothers asking, how long should I breastfeed my baby? Isn't it enough if it's 6 months, or maximum say about 1 year, which seems to be the recommendation that we hear often. So the WHO recommendation, or the BPNI, which is the Breastfeeding Promotion Network of India, or the Lactation League, which is the international NGO which supports mothers who wish to breastfeed, all of them recommend minimum of 2 years of breastfeeding, continued breastfeeding of exclusive 6 months, and continued breastfeeding with solids to at least about 2 years. And the natural age for weaning, if you look at it from the studies, which are anthropological studies, tell us that natural age of weaning is about 4.5 years, around 2.5 years to 4.5 years. It's interesting to note that the first set of milk teeth that actually fall and the permanent tooth comes up, it's around 5 to 6 years. So that's how long the breastfeeding is natural for growing children.
So Yasmin, many times once the weaning starts, not weaning but introducing solids, mothers are often confused that how many times one should breastfeed the baby, how many meals should be given. So the correlation between food and the breast milk is hard to crack for mothers. So what do you suggest? What is the nutritional sufficiency that one needs at what age for the baby?
Well, to keep a good balance of mother's milk, along with the introduction of solids, around middle of the first year, which is about 5.5 months to about 6.5 months, you notice that the good recommendation is to always breastfeed first for the first 1 year, which is from 6 months to about 1 year, and then offer the meal to the baby, say within a gap of about 45 minutes to about an hour. That gives a little bit of a support for the baby not to be extremely hungry and actually substitute mother's milk to the solids. So the idea about the second 6 months of the baby's life, it's a supplementation. The solids in the second 6 months of the baby's first year of life is not about substituting mother's milk to the solids, but rather it's a supplementation. In order to continue long-term breastfeeding and to keep the mother's milk supply uncompromised, the best recommendation is to continue to breastfeed the baby first, and then offer small amounts of meals, and stop at a time when the baby seems like have had enough, and not have to beat yourself up with, say, okay, I have a whole bowl of the rice porridge in it, or maybe fruits in it, or vegetables in it, and baby must complete all of that. So that would be an unrealistic expectation of a baby, because the second 6 months is really about exploring textures, the color of the food, and creating a relationship with food, really.
So Yasmin, for mothers, as a guideline, when they start introducing food, what do you think should be their food and breast milk balance for the coming year, or say whatever you suggest, as a guideline for them, for nutrition sufficiency that the baby needs?
Right. So when you start, solids are about 5.5 months, between 5.5 months to 6.5 months. One must understand that it's the food that you're going to start, which is in the form of solids for the baby, is actually often the supplement and not the main food of the baby. The main food of the baby for the second 6 months of baby's life should be predominantly breast milk, which is mother's milk, direct breastfeeding. It almost forms about 80% of your food. And when you start solids, it would be a good recommendation or a good practice for a mother to offer the breast milk first, and say wait for about half an hour to about 45 minutes, and then offer the solid meal. And the quantity also is very little, smaller quantities of food, and allow the baby to regulate how much the baby seems to be satisfied with, rather than to have a certain expectation of so much should be completed within a certain period of time, and baby must have 3 meals a day. So the second half of the baby's first year of life is really about exploring colors, textures, and the feel of the food, and creating a relationship with food necessarily. So a mother supporting that actually encourages self-autonomy of the baby.